Or it was just sort of spontaneous, crazy brains.
Yeah, we'll get started, man. And I'm Brandon Shiflett. This is my brother Jarrod. I want to thank you all. I appreciate every one of you coming. I thought it'd be like one person. I just want to. We didn't know we were going to have this panel. Comic-Con invited us, and whose ever idea it was to make it Shiflett Brothers and Friends. I know that every art director for every big company that's ever fired us, and they all have fired us, are thinking, perfect, every sculptor needs to role model their careers after the Shiflett Brothers, and we need them up there talking. But aside from me and my brother, the greatest thing about this panel are the people who agreed to do it with us. And to my left is Claiborne Moore, and she don't know what he is. Obviously, you know him, you know what he does. And the man that only needs one name, Barsom, great sculptor. And on the end, a guy who really influenced, however old he is, he influenced Jarrod and I to start sculpting, literally, when we saw his work. One of our absolute heroes, Paul Komoda. And these guys know what they're doing way more than Jarrod and I, and that's why we got them up here. And I'd like to just take questions, and I think that's what we're going to do. And I don't know how much each guy has to say on his own, but I'd like to open it up to questions. Anybody? Go ahead. Absolutely. I can tell you that Jarrod and I brought, we wanted to be comic book artists. It's as simple as that. We couldn't do it. We couldn't draw. We realized we could sculpt, vaguely sculpt, and we brought things here in 1991, 92, about that time. We brought like 15 one-of-a-kind marble stuff, you know. We showed it, and people picked up our cards. There wasn't really this cold cast porcelain industry then. It was just resin kits and stuff. No, that was here. It was here when we first really got noticed. It was out here, and soon after, Clay noticed us and was really helped us out a lot of mentored us. Yeah, in Texas, and all it was for us was sculpting for about a year or 2 years before we even showed in anywhere. We got our stuff to a level we thought we could show it. We did. We started getting calls to work, and we've been lucky enough to be working ever since and doing some of our own stuff now. What?
Can y'all hear me okay? I didn't test this or anything. I started out with the bronze. I would do my own figures, sort of mythological and things from fantasy, that sort of thing. And it's about 85, 86. And then I entered a science fiction fantasy show and found that went well, sold a few bronzes. So I was kind of building a bronze business, doing my own designs. And then in 92, Bowen offered me a Vampirella. And I think they did it as a kit. But that was the first piece I did in this business, and that was 92, 93. And then I started looking around and thinking, well, there's a lot of money in these editions. So I decided that I would do one piece for each of the major companies, and this is something I recommend to any sculptor. And then I went overseas to China and found a factory. So I built my name through doing a piece for each of the major companies. And went overseas, found a factory to produce the stuff, started licensing with Eric Larson first. He was the first thing that I did under my own banner, under the More Creations banner. And since then, done a lot of female figures mostly, and worked with a lot of the independents. I've done a few Marvel pieces. I don't think, I did the Death figure for DC for Vertigo years and years ago with Bowen. But mostly worked with independents over the years.
Barsom. Kind of just fell into this actually. No, seriously, I used to do illustration, painting and stuff. I've always done, drawings and whatever. I think you find a lot of artists seem to have like, well, either they're really multi-talented or they're just one brain. You know what I mean? You got guys who can paint, draw, and whatever. They can shoot hoops and all sorts of styles. But it was. I'm trying to think of. It's not even my illustration. I spent 10, 12 years in illustration and realized I was bored. Really. I started picking up sculpture and I realized there's a market for it. You know, there's action figures and whatnot. I started doing model kits, and after the model kits came out, I'm trying to remember how this was. I should have never really thought about this.
You fell ass backwards.
Yeah, basically. I had William Paquette and Tim Bruckner had separately suggested me to Mr. George Brewer back in like '99.
That helps.
What's that?
That helps.
That helps a lot. Yeah. What else that helped a lot is, preparation. Because I already had a website. He had called me, asked me to send in a portfolio, asked me if he was online. He looked it up and sent me a job the next day.
Good deal.
Yeah, wasn't bad. Especially since I only had a couple $100 left in my bank account.
That's what I have now.
I
Motivating.
didn't know where it was coming from. So, but then that just led, one thing to another, pre-paints into action figures, and, that's pretty much how I got into it. And now I'm sitting here trying to remember how the hell I got into it. So.
Oh, that's good.
Thanks. Paul?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting process because I've always drawn and sculpted. It was sort of interchangeable, but there was never really a separation between the two mediums in my head. It was always just a matter of expressing things and what would be more interesting at the time. But when it came time to be more realistic about things growing up, I figured I wanted to take up illustration, and my first motivation getting into things at all was doing comics and design. Well, I was always inspired by film design, creatures, and the like, getting very imaginative with things. But I found I could only draw, no matter what it was, however imaginative or elaborate it would have been, I could only draw it once. I could conceive it and as an image and only see it from this one angle, but that would be it. It would be dead, inert after that point. And so it was just endlessly frustrating, knowing that I could never get it past this one particular realm. And so I figured if I picked up sculpting, I'd give myself a finer idea of how things were dimensionalized, how things projected into space. And so I picked up sculpting again. And it just started as almost as a study and not taking it seriously, but then I began doing the resin kits back in the 90s. And from that point on, I garnered some attention from that, and I ended up doing some work for DC Comics, some Batman promotional sculptures of that, things of that sort. And from that point, I evolved into doing work for the action figure industry. And lately, I've been doing things for film. In fact, the latest thing I've done is something I've never done before, which is sculpting for prosthetic makeup effects.
We were very influenced by your Edward Scissorhands kit.
And Dr. Shadar.
Yeah,
thank you.
Too. We saw that at Chiller in New York. That was probably a turning point for us.
Well, and these guys can all speak to process, but I'll tell you, for those of you who haven't talked to us at our table for hours on end, we'll ramble. Jarrod and I use aluminum alloy armature. We wrap it with floral wire. That's how we hold it together. You need a skeleton. We use super sculpting. That's what we like. A lot of the big companies want you to use wax. It's cool. Use wax. We're using super sculpting. Our heroes are a lot of the Japanese guys. Yasushi Nirasawa, Taiki Takeya, Yuji Omiki. And I know for a fact Takeya's using super sculpting. I see it in the books. I see the little green and white box on his desk. So when McFarlane Toys says you've gone as far as you can go with super sculpting, ask them if Takayuki Takeya has gone as far as he can go with super sculpting. And he's, the tightest bastard in the clean sky I've ever seen. I still love it. Hey, if they want you to use wax, use wax. So we use gray super sculpting. Obviously, you want it to be opaque. That's one of the first rules. You don't want to lose you don't want to have the translucency of the paint stuff, where you get imperfections in the surface that you don't see until you bake. we wrap it with floral wire, that's our armature, and we use a ton of super glue. Like I said, we use Bray Super Sculpting, and
You mean the new?
Yeah.
Because I use Super Sculpting, but I mix with Sculpting 3 in order to get the quality.
Yeah, I'll mix it with
I like the
female.
consistency of it better.
Yeah, it's female is usually the thing on this
I
one.
think we all use super sculpting.
yeah. Well, these other guys can use different things. Jared and I can only use one thing, I know that. And, because I've seen Jared's attempts and others in media. It's not worked yet. But I will tell you this as well, that, even within us, and me and Jared do different things. Jared mixes his still as part of the process. I use the Super Sculpting Gray. I mean, I was so done with mixing it by hand that it was really prohibiting me from sculpting. It was like a minute. I was just like, I'm not doing that for 30 minutes, And for me, to pull it right out of the box is a big deal. Jared, he likes to mix it. So, to each his own. I know clay can work with anything. And, if you've used Super Sculpting, you bake it at a low temperature. And not to touch it once it's baked until it cools down completely, probably. And all the secrets, but Clay Moore and these guys know many more secrets than we do. So about process, I would pass it off to Clay, or if anybody has any specific questions. about
Any questions?
Yes.
For somebody who's just starting sculpting, what would you recommend using?
Good question.
I'd still go with even a young man like yourself, I'd go with Super Sculpey and I'd mix it or use I think maybe the Sculpey Firm, the Sculpey Gray is a little too firm. I think you want something you can push around a little bit more easily. So I would say, maybe get your pop to help you mix the Sculpey 3 with the regular Sculpey. And what's nice about that is that you can do a figure and you can bake it and then you can add to it, like maybe a warrior and you want to put a sword in his hand or a shield or something. You can bake it, harden it, add it to the figure, and that's what's nice about it. So over other things, another thing about it that's good is that you can bake it and hold on to it so that when you look back, when you're a little older, you can look back at what you've done and kind of see what it was like back then. But if you use clay or something that you can't harden, it's probably going to get messed up and gone forever.
That's a good
So
point.
that's what I'd say.
I think with the Sculpey too, though, I think anybody who's just getting into it, get out all your crap. You got to make a bunch of crap before you can actually make anything that really works. So if you're learning your anatomy and all that kind of stuff, you're going to want something like Sculpey that you can kind of get in and get moving. Wax, yourself, you've got build up, you're cutting it down with sandpaper,
It's a big learning curve. with
Yeah,
this
it
stuff.
is. It is.
Very rewarding, in fact,
Yeah.
once you hone it down, but it doesn't happen overnight.
And he's right. Get out the bad stuff. People will always come to us and say, I bailed on this one. I have to finish this piece. I don't want to bail on it. And they're just starting, or they're in the first year or whatever. Jared says, once you reach that point, just put it aside and go to the next one. You're learning the whole time. Learn what you can learn, and you move ahead. And as I said, man, Jared and I didn't show anyone stuff for 2 years. I mean, not even locally, and not that we're that great now, but it's a certain kind of courage to put your stuff out there, and I think Super Sculpting is the quickest way to get into it, obviously. The heating up stuff and heating up tools and all of that, that's really works for some people, not us.
Since you put me on the spot, I'm going to show my ignorance of where you get this stuff.
Michael's, Hobby Lobby, any hobby store. It's amazing. It's just basically so easy to find. It's probably easier to find than Roma Plastilina.
Yeah.
I mean, it's right there.
Walmart
Yeah.
has
Yeah.
it.
I didn't know if Walmart carries it. Do they carry it?
And it's really, almost in the beginning, I think it was for like jewelry pieces. And
Yeah, it's
things,
very
Right.
arts and crafts oriented.
Yeah.
And it was.
Because you can bake it and harden it.
Right, and the stuff on, and the company's called Polyform Products. And the stuff that they would show sometimes in their ads or their boxes, was laughable. It was like a gingerbread man or something. We're like, wow, man, you can do a lot more with it than that, And so basically, if anybody's from Polyform, we want you to sponsor us.
One of the things I think that you run into, and that I've had sculptors say to me is, like, why are you still using super sculpting when everybody's using wax or castellane, that stuff? And I agree with Brandon 100%. The knock that they would say was, you can't get the detail that you want out of super sculpt, and I'd say, no, you can't get the detail you want out of super sculpt, because it's here, it's not there. I mean, you can get the detail you want out of super sculpt, I guarantee you, if you want. But that's why I stay with it. I used to use wax in college, and that was too long ago. I don't use it because it's a pain. And you have to heat your tools, and you have to worry about that. And then I start reading up on castellane. I don't want to knock the company or anything, but then they say, oh, well, then when you want to sand it, you got to put it in the freezer. I thought, I got other things to do. I got steaks in the freezer. I don't need to sculpt, so I just stay with super sculpting.
Well, now I can quote Clay more on super sculpting as well as Natalie, so.
In the sake of accurate armatures, so you don't have to go back and redo anything, to what level do you take your control art before you begin a sculpture?
We don't do control art.
I don't do control art either.
We can't really draw. We are failed comic book artists.
At what level would you request control art from
We
us?
never.
I guess it depends on the project, really. If it has to be 100% accurate to, say, an established film character or a comic character, then I'd probably say yes. Myself, I do the merest gestural drawing just to get the idea down, and then I'd improvise three-dimensionally.
I feel like I know myself right now.
When you're creating a character, do you guys usually restrict how it's going to look based on who you have to cast it? Or do you let that be a hindrance?
None whatsoever. Now, much of the guys who hire us to their chagrin, but it's at least with our own stuff, and this is only for me and Jarrod, but they say, you want it to be small, or you want it to be this easy, and of course you want to avoid undercuts and all these things. You can, obviously, but they would tell us, here's how you need to do these small, you need it done like this. And like one of the first things we bought was DK's pumpkin head. And we got it, and it was like 78 pieces. You know what I mean? So the point is, they can cast it. It may cost you more, but they can cast it.
Anything can be cast.
Exactly. Anything can be cast. Now, if you want to do it cheaply, learn how to do it cheaply.
Yeah, watch for the undercuts.
Sculpt them like this, whatever. But you'll see, especially Japanese stuff in previews or whatever, with the ribbons coming out, flying completely around them 3 times, and the horns flying in every direction. And you're saying, who told this guy that's going to be cast? Nobody told him. Nobody told him. So that's why Clay would get probably something like the Draco from us, and Clay would say, "What the hell?" I'm sure he did. And but for our own personal work, Jarrod and I try to avoid those restrictions completely. Anyway,
I think
go ahead.
at the same time, though, you should understand that companies are paying the bill, and
Absolutely.
you got to make a change.
Absolutely. When you're working for companies and somebody's paying the dime, obviously that's a huge factor. I can only speak for that's for our original stuff that we're paying for at half cast. That's under our own bill.
That's a whole different conversation, though. I mean, dealing with a client is sort of a different part of this whole thing, and you're absolutely right. If you're doing it for yourself, it's one thing, but you have to be prepared for those undercuts, because a company that's picking a sculptor wants to know that they receive a piece that costs them less to get ready for market. And so you do pay attention to those points. When you're creating your own pieces, you have more freedoms, of course.
Well, it definitely raises your stock too as an artist. You start to understand that, okay, I can save you this, I can offer you that, and you can just step back and go, okay, this is what you want. This is going to be done. You sometimes hope they don't put your name on it, but and I think we all have to do that. You're like, crushing this.
Our name's off it. I would never said that.
Any other questions?
Sir.
In the middle.
Also, the question is with super sculpting, regular sculpting, sometimes oiling it, once you start cooking it, get less of a burn factor.
I've heard that.
I haven't tried that
Interesting
yet.
point. I never have done that.
It's really weird, but sometimes the regular sculpt, like the white stuff, really, I don't know how good it is, because it really not weird kind of finish. to it? Is that plastic?
Yeah, it's got a chalkier, kind of candier feel to it. It doesn't really feel like the sculpting gets really crisp and
Yeah.
tight and stuff. That stuff still feels a little,
Man, it's a completely different thing.
Yeah.
It's sticky,
It's
to your
doughy.
hands.
yeah.
Unless you're doing something, I don't know, a little bit bigger, or you want that look.
On the zombies, I realize it's a nice kind of cool kind of look, but
Mhm.
texture like that.
Right.
It's just putting it in a corner, putting your tools on it.
Exactly.
That's
Or
my
you-
opinion.
You can carve a badass gingerbread man out of it. That goes great. And then when you want to sculpt a maquette or something, use the super.
It's good as filler, yeah. Just
Good as filler.
building up
Yeah,
something.
no, you're right on that. That's if you just want to block out some base real quick, just burn it, put something on top of it, but otherwise.
For that finished look on the super sculpting products, would you just brush it? I've also tried hand sanitizer with something somebody suggested at one point.
I tried turpenoid. That works in very, very moderate amounts in a brush.
We use a 91% rubbing alcohol, but technically isopropyl alcohol. Yeah, that's good. And then there's a 70% we want to avoid, and then there's a 99% I haven't tried yet, but I've seen. But we pretty much go with 91%, and it's like with the Vaseline, it's a little bit goes a long way. And then after something's baked, we can put on a little bit of Vaseline and wipe it off, and the fresh Sculpey will adhere to the baked Sculpey. And so we'll bake stuff 5 or 6 times during the process. I've had some pieces I baked 10 times, and that's probably overkill, but it's just part of our process.
And on the rubbing alcohol, man, we use like a watercolor paintbrush or something like that, you get in there and you work it. But in our experience, you want to wait till, you're pretty close to done, to starting with that rubbing alcohol, because the stuff gets very tacky afterwards. And the rubbing alcohol, I'm sure the turpenoid can help immensely, with fingerprints, with imperfections. But once you've done that, it's difficult to work on. So save that as like the last thing you do, and then put it in the oven.
Do any of you guys use any kind of dilutants for actual sculpting itself? You know what I mean? Like when you get down to a face, you can use a brush and get in there and resculpt.
Yeah, Susan
Oh,
stuff.
yeah,
Yeah.
I use that for textures.
Yeah.
Sometimes,
Yeah, I've heard of that.
Yeah.
But I haven't done it that much myself. But Brandon brings up a good point. You really want to wait. I've seen, if there's one mistake that I see sculptors make, I see a lot of mistakes, but what I mean is they'll try to lean too much on the brush with the alcohol or the turpentine or benzene or whatever, and they'll try to replace what I call the trench hours, where you're just in the trench digging, where you just have to take the time to finish the piece out. You shouldn't be using that until, God, the last half of 1%. I mean, you really want to finish either with tools or by hand, and don't fake it by using the material with the brush, because it shows.
And don't let the material work you.
Yeah.
I have problems with membranes, even when I use a mesh, a fine mesh. Even the mesh shows through. If I don't use a mesh, I tried hanging it so that the sculpting would hang, but when you bake it, it starts making it sag more. So, and then it's really brittle when you break it out, even though I heat it up slow, and then I just leave it in there overnight until I'm absolutely sure it's done. It still breaks. And I can't get that fine wing structure or, a membrane in between fingers.
We build up a lot of stuff with floral wire, and that's a wire that has a not microscopic, but a small strand of thread woven around it. So when you hit it with super glue, it really becomes hard and yet flexible. So for wings, you can build up stuff like that as the tendons and bones would be. And that's probably how you do it. Paul, what would you do?
I remember the first time I attempted doing bat wings, I went through the most excessive, ridiculous process. I actually built up a kind of a positive out of Sculpey or whatever that was I was using. We're sculpting over it. There was some sort of release agent or something in between to keep it the form there. And I baked that, and I sort of removed it from the top of this positive piece. At least to give me a shape.
Yeah, I think we always try to
Yeah.
one thing or another.
I guess in more recent days I've used other materials. two small thin membranes with that.
How many of you all are sculptors or interested in sculpting? Obviously, you're all interested, but okay, so y'all are sculptors as opposed to collectors. That's a good point. I was curious.
Those bastards are out there. It's man, we get lots of love on our art forums, and we get less love on statue forums, collectors forums. You know, why does it look so much like Simon Bisley? Because we did it from a Simon Bisley drawing. See, that was our man page from Randy. You might notice Biz at the bottom. Anyway, you know, I want to say again, if you followed our careers at all, Claymore was a huge help, mentor to us. He was in Texas, we were in Texas. He had studied in Europe, and you know, we had studied in like X-Men. You know, John Romita X-Men was our education. Walt Simonson's Run on Board was our entire artistic education. It's all we really cared about, and really still care about. That's all we. And so, but Clay, our first, you know, we did some resin kits and we did some video game work for Oddworld. We were doing maquettes with Clay. We did our first cold cast piece with Clay, the Draco, and that launched.
It's a beautiful piece.
That launched us to a whole different level because Clay gave us that. You know what I mean? It's, you know, he gave us the piece, he gave us the project. People love Draco, people love dragons, and with Clay's art direction, the piece came out. The piece is still, you know, we get an email or two every week about the Draco. Yeah, it was a Spectrum.
You guys
Yeah, it was a
award
Spectrum
for that,
piece.
so.
Right. So
Yeah.
and the gold was a 3-foot tall metallic robot, and that's not sculpting, but I'm not bitter.
The guy wins like almost every year too.
Yeah, he wins like every year. Those things are wicked. Those things are wicked. But so
She had a question. You had a question?
yeah.
Yeah, because I think you work too, how do you clean stock
I mean, so many things, but you have to, you get your portfolio, you get a good number. Man, Clay needs to answer this because he actually hired people. But if you get your portfolio and you come to the San Diego Comic-Con, seriously, that's where almost everybody who can hire you is under one roof in this industry. I mean, you can't do better than that. And you have your portfolios, and you have leavable portfolios, you know, in whatever kind of package you want to. You hand them out. If you can get FaceTime with a Claymore or a George Brewer at DC, you know, or Tom Gilliland at Sideshow, you do. And you go into the booth and you say, who's looking at sculpture portfolios, who's looking at 3D portfolios, and there are not as many of us as there are, you know, pencilers. I mean, those poor guys, you know what I mean? So if you say, who's looking at sculpture portfolios, there's so much stuff being done now. There wasn't when me and Jarrod started, and there's so much stuff being done now that they will look at the portfolios, you know, almost all the time. And you have to have a good balance of stuff in your portfolio. You have to crop the weakest stuff. You have to.
It's like
ask
we're saying
who the
before.
weakest stuff is.
You don't want to put everything in there.
They have a lot of stuff, but you know, they have a lot of crap. They just get into it and they think, oh, I got a portfolio.
Right.
It's like, you know, like we're saying, knock out the stuff, get the junk out. Because I've seen it before. Guys just come up to me with a portfolio and it's like, I don't know, Leonard Nimoy, and it's like 6 different shots and it's one bust and it's like, I don't know, 10 pages.
Right.
And I'm like, it's Leonard Nimoy in gray. And in soup.
Yeah, keep it short, keep it sweet, don't talk it to death. You had a great experience sculpting it. You don't need to talk about it as long as it took you to sculpt it. And, you know, and it's the same, I've talked to Eric Larson about this at Image, it's the same thing when a company's looking. I'll look at portfolios anytime. If I'm not, I have to do something, I may not be hiring at the time. I'm a more compact company now, but if you want a critique, I'll be happy to look at your portfolio at any time. You make a good point. You don't want to have too many pieces in there. I was looking at a portfolio today, and I don't know if the gentleman's here, but what I'm just saying is I told him, he had a nice progression of about 4 pieces, and then he had another piece that was just well, now wait a minute. He goes, oh, that's my first piece that I ever did. And it's like, well, don't put it late in your portfolio because, you know, it's a speed bump. So it stopped everything down. I said, in fact, take that piece out because you've come way past it. It's a waste of time to show an early piece that actually makes your portfolio look worse. You remember what you learned. You took a photo of it. Don't put it in your portfolio. About 10 good pieces is good. 10 or 12 if you're professional and you've done professional work, then you might have 12 or 18 pieces, but I wouldn't go over that. And you know, you just want to talk it through, and like Brandon said, if you have a sales sheet, 4 to 6 good pieces is enough. You know, that gives a good idea. Keep it a little bit of a broad range. You know, a monster, a woman, and a man. If you have that, if your forte is monsters, several monsters is fine.
Yeah, and you know, if you can use another pair of eyes or someone you trust, Jarrod and I always think we're super lucky. So there are 2 of us, and we would have our portfolio, and I would give it to Jarrod, and I would say, take out the weakest thing, you know, in this thing, and he would take out the weakest thing, and he would give it back to you, say, you take out the weakest thing, and then I would take out the weakest thing, and then we would, seriously, you know, we would go from 10 to 8, and we would have taken out the 2 weakest things in our mind, you know, and yeah, that's it. Don't put everything you've ever sculpted.
I think you also have to leave that whole ego thing at the door and understand being
right.
polite and being persistent and knowing that, like, look, you may not have a job for hire, but you may not remember that I wanted that job, and you know, a phone call, an email every so often, it shows that you really do want the job, but you know, don't be a jerk about it. I've seen some guys who are really talented that really don't get work because they're just difficult. You know,
That's a big part of it for a company.
I wouldn't know who speaks to us. I wouldn't know who you're talking about. Go ahead.
What's the best way to walk that line for being annoyingly persistent and letting them know that you're very interested in your work?
I'd say check back in. With me, you can write me at service@csmorestudio.com, and I have no problem with checking in every couple of 3 months, especially if you have something new to show. You know, if it's a piece that you feel like Brandon said, if you feel like it's top level and it represents what you're currently doing and how the level at which you now are, whether you're sending it to me possibly to look for work or just for a critique, I'll be happy to. And it is a case where I'll tell you what's good about it and I'll tell you what's bad about it if it's a critique that you're talking about. But every couple of 3 months is fine with me.
Another thing a lot of companies are looking for now is people who can emulate a 2D artist style. Right? And I mean, the guy at DC Direct, John Matthews, I don't know if you've seen that guy is wicked. The guy who's doing the Batman black and white. Yeah, he does like the Mignola Batman, the Steve Rude Batman. Because you know that it's going to these places because you get to a point where you're like, how many Hulks can be on the market? You know, seriously, when is enough Wolverine? You know, and so that's what you're gonna have to start doing. You're gonna have to, and you're already seeing it. The Alex Ross Batman, you know, the Alex Ross Superman, and the Mike Mignola, and so that's a talent in and of itself. If you understand 2D artist style and you can emulate that in 3D, and that's a talent.
The weirdest thing I think that I found about that is a lot of times you have these artists who are, you know, once again, they're 2D oriented, and they know it back and forth. But for some reason, they don't seem to grasp that you've done your illustration and you've modified their anatomy because in the illustration, you know, it looks great like this, don't work like that because it looks stupid from this angle, you know?
A lot of artists, they work in a very specific style and they don't realize what it is that makes their work strong sometimes. I mean, obviously it's innate. But when they actually show it to them three-dimensionally as an object in space, it throws them almost.
Yeah.
Wow, that's the way that's me? Yeah, that's you.
Jarrod's really done that we've done a number of Disney pieces, you know, it's like these girls can look unbelievable. You start trying to go around here, make this work with where the spine is, good luck, man. And you've got to make that work from every angle, you know, and also it's got to look like Disney from the other angles, you know.
And you're making up that part of it.
Yeah, all that's made up.
Yeah, you know, a good artist, a good two-dimensional artist is going to understand that and be a professional. But then, of course, you have a lot of egos and you have a lot of personalities involved. But I consider the best, and that's probably no secret, is Frank Frazetta as far as I'm concerned. And even Frazetta, I was working on The Princess. I don't know if you know that piece, but it's from the Fighting Man of Mars, and I did this female figure sitting down, and he looked at it, and he didn't have that painting anymore. He'd sold it some years before. And I said, well, I have it right here in the Valentine book. And so he looked at it, and he looked at the photo of the statue, and he goes, you don't have to sculpt exactly what I paint. And I said, hey, I'm not going to screw around, but if you say so, then I'm going to change it. Because he had elongated the figure, and hips didn't work. But when he said that, then I thought, great, now I can get back and make it work, because it was a very frustrating experience. When you work with other people that are more in your age range and that have less of that legend about them, like a Joe Lensner or something like that I'm working with now, it's not a problem at all. They understand. Bisley would understand that too. He's got their style is so well given to Bisley's work, it's got to be a really nice relationship.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think a lot of it depends on whether or not the other artists actually have any experience having their work transferred. They know the give and take. They understand. Yeah, that's good.
Most of them.
Stuff that all the stuff that I've worked with Brom's like, yeah, that's just, you run with it. Come back with something, he's like, we'll try this, we'll try that, try something else. It's like, I love it, great. That's kind of,
Yeah, and on that topic, man, it's so much, you won't believe the difference in working for something that's creator-owned, where you're dealing with one guy, as opposed to, say, Marvel Comics, You get so many cooks in the kitchen.
It's a committee process.
It's the licensor, it's Marvel Legal, it's Marvel Creative. You get to know, just a person who happened to be answering the phone that day, has a couple notes about the anatomy. And so when we did with clay, we did the Kabuki statue. And we were answering for one person, David Mack and clay, But that's cool because David knows what he wants and he's telling you, and it's his thing, and that's totally rad. And also, he's an artist. He's not a bureaucrat. He's not an executive, and you can feel a lot more comfortable. And we worked with Brendel Prime for Bowen Designs and working, Matt Wagner. I mean, that was a thrill for us. We were huge fans of his. And it's cool when that happens, when you can work with Joe Lensner or something like that. It's so much nicer.
It's a huge difference. A few years ago, not very long ago, the approval department at Marvel, which you'd think would be creative people that know the characters, was 3 lawyers. They didn't know who the characters were. They knew what the bottom line was. I was talking to DST, and we were talking about doing a John Byrne Wolverine, and they said, that's not Hugh Jackman. Literally, that's what they said. That doesn't look like Hugh Jackman. And they also didn't seem to understand the logic of doing an 80s Wolverine, a 90s Wolverine, whatever. Like we're saying, the different styles by the different artists. It was amazing. Needless to say, well, not necessarily Marvel, not necessarily needless to say, they got rid of those guys. But it was about time. And now I understand that it's an easier process from what I hear. But I just don't like those headaches, so I stay with, just like Brandon's saying, I stay with creators. And I keep it simple, and I work with the people I've worked with for years, and we really understand each other.
Deadlines, what are average deadlines? What is crazy deadline?
The Draco.
We're not the people to ask. We're the worst.
Yeah, they're not the people to ask.
That's kind of why I thought it was hilarious to kind of ask you to host this panel. But no, we're very slow industry-wise, and these guys can tell you much more than we can.
Well, it depends on the company, right? I mean, I've heard some horror stories, and I like George Brewer and Jim Fletcher, they're good guys, but boy, I've heard horror stories from some of these guys that work with them that it's like a 10-day turnaround on stuff, and I couldn't do a piece I couldn't do what I consider good work in 10 days.
yeah.
Maybe a bust or something, but
That's where you start to feel like, well, what the hell are you asking for? You're asking for an exceptionally beautiful piece, but let's knock it out quick. Let's get it out fast. Can you get on to the next one?
Yeah.
It's like, well, yeah, if I'm, doing the best, but,
Yeah. And a lot of guys say, look at this, I did it in 7 days. And I said, that's exactly what it looks like.
That's exactly right. So yeah, I don't want to hear you did it in 7 days. Now, to answer your question specifically from my point of view as an art director, I would probably say, and I'm pretty easy with this because I understand it from the sculpting point of view, but I would say that to do a bust, 3 weeks is plenty of time. To do a full figure, 6 weeks is plenty of time. It shouldn't take more than that.
That's right.
unless you're on meth.
And that's in the far end. that's a pretty long time. I mean, it'd be better to see it in 2.5 weeks, and for the statue 5 weeks. You know.
That sounds about right.
Yeah. I mean, and if I hire somebody, believe me, I'm not going to dock them for each day that they're late, especially if I'm the one making the changes.
Although that does happen.
And I've heard that happens with some very well-known 3D companies, and I think it's disgusting. I'll say right here. In fact, don't stand for it. You know, you should have some self-respect and not put up with $75 a day dock fee. Especially if, I understand it from the company's point of view, if it is taking too long and the changes have been made and it's just a matter of finishing, okay, I can understand that from a business point of view. But if I ask for the changes, or I understand as a thinking human being that I'm the one who's asked for the changes, I'm not going to, I would never dock. I would never insult anyone like that. And it happens in this industry.
Yeah, it does. Absolutely. And for those of you, I don't know how many of you guys have been on our forum, but on our site, we have a sculpting forum. And we have a lot of good sculptors on there. And they're pros and amateurs alike. And you've got everything from Hollywood professionals to like 12 and 13-year-old kids who are just getting started. Everybody is really free with their information. You just have to ask a question, and 10 guys will help you out. And so any more questions about process and everything, feel free to come on there and ask if you get stuck in the middle of it at some point. I just want to say that. Anything else? Yeah, Lee.
You guys are all terrific sculptors, and some of you 2D artists on top of that. My question is, you've been doing this a while. You've done a lot of good work. You've done work that maybe you wish your name wasn't on. But will each of you tell me the piece of yours that you're the most proud of, the most pleased with?
It's a piece I've done. It's like it's 10 years old at this point. I'm not saying this, but I think it's perfect by all means. I look at the piece and completely apart, top to bottom. But I really truly enjoyed doing this. It's a sculpture based on Julia from Hellraiser 2. It was a fleshless female figure standing over this. Yeah, and she was just with her hand forward and this rather desiccated corpse at her feet, and I just had a blast with that. And it's more just from the experience that I gained from it and how it looked, and it just ended up looking pretty much exactly the way I wanted it to at the time. And like I said, I can look at it now and critique it to pieces, but I was blessed with it.
I don't know, I think like any of us, we're gonna be like, oh crap, we see this, we see that, or whatever. But yeah, there's an occasional piece that even minus the defects or changes you would make, it still stands out and you go, first glance, you go, oh yeah, I still kind of like that piece. For me, fortunately or unfortunately, it was a piece I did for an illustrator named Coop, and it's a racier piece, so I'm not going to get into it, but it's a female piece that I did, and when I showed it to him, he goes, wow, that's disgusting. And I'm like, you drew those. I just brought your vision. I guess that's it. Yeah. Sure.
It's a nice piece.
It's hard. I'm trying to say Draco, we did play.
It was in a few magazines, like you know, and so people got a gist of it, and it just went away. No one ever saw it again, so they kind of built up a legend about it. But if you ever see the piece in real life, or there weren't many good photographs taken of it either, but it's really, really cool. And that's probably my favorite of ours.
Yeah, that's a fantastic piece. I mean, it's got so much motion to it, so much movement. It's what's really nice about licensing is when the artist does bring in something of himself. I think it's important to be able to emulate the look of the particular artist, but at the same time, in my opinion, coming from fine art background, I'd like to see the artist, the sculptor come through as the artist of the piece. People tell me they recognize my style in the pieces I do, and I don't necessarily see that as a bad thing. Well, in traditional fine art, it isn't a bad thing. You want to have a style. But that was a piece that was absolutely beautiful, and it's part of the nightmare of licensing, that things like that can happen and pieces don't get produced. Universal is a nightmare to work with, and I just stopped it. Universal was very, very difficult, and I really have always regretted that. What happened to the last casting of that one?
We've got,
Oh, good. Well, take a mold off.
we've got, absolutely.
Hey.
There we go. So what's your favorite piece you've done?
Well, you know, people ask me if there's anybody you've ever wanted to work with that you haven't, and I always say, well, I've worked with Frazetta. I mean,
That's it.
you worked with Frazetta, that's it. But so it's probably the Barbarian. But until I did the Cole piece recently, and to me that was very, very different because Brandon and Jarrod do their own designs now, and it's almost like they're at a point where I want to be. I'd like to spend about half my year doing license work and about half my year doing original pieces. But Cole was my own interpretation. I said to the owners of the license, Conan Properties, that I would like to design it myself, and from the written material, from the stories themselves. And so that's my interpretation of the character, from pose to facial features to everything, and why I did a blog on our website about it. And I'd say that's my favorite piece because it was as close to an original as I've had the time to do in a long time.
It's badass.
It's a fun piece.
Absolutely. Anybody else?
Thanks, Sean and Jared.
And Jack?
Okay. What do you guys think about, I was reading on one of the forums about the union, sculptors.
I talked about a sculptors union 10 years ago and gave up. As long as sculptors are willing to work for peanuts, the companies that hire are going to take advantage of them and pay them peanuts.
Yeah.
And until they get the self-respect to say that they're not going to do that, then it's a tough situation.
I think also I had a situation with DC where, God love them, they had a group of us like myself, Tim Bruckner, Karen Polenko, William Buquette, I mean, yeah, a big core group, Jack Matthews, John Matthews, core group of people who really had a great diversification of their talents. And if I had a problem, I had a deadline, I had casting, I'd say, hey Tim, can you cast this? Hey William, I got a dog here, they want this thing. Like, you're all helping each other out. And then all of a sudden, it seemed like somebody thought that maybe we were kind of a workable group, and that's the core of any great union, is to realize that we're all watching each other's backs.
Did you stand up on the table?
We should have.
Makes sense.
Except I'm young scab.
Yeah. You know, Clay taught us that very early on. Clay taught us that, hey, if you take a really low price, you're lowering the price for everybody.
Yeah.
You know, you're lowering the price for everybody. Don't screw everyone. Try, you know what I mean? Get into the business, but do it the right way.
To avoid that situation and not giving away prices or things like that, what's a good average price for like a statue, an action figure, or, I mean, it's no matter how long it's going to take you, or detailing?
That's definitely part of it.
Yeah.
And,
The scale of it.
I always tell people, man, I can't tell you what your sculpture is worth, you know what I mean? I mean, everybody in this room is at a different level. And, you know, I mean, it's very difficult. Like, I would let Clay answer that because, again, he hires people.
Appreciate it. It's a tough one because with so much merchandise in the marketplace now, editions are much smaller. And hopefully if I have to have a talk about budget, because it's going to be a very small project, I think that my reputation is such that an artist I work with is going to trust me, that if I say this is tight budget, it's a tight budget. And what I'll do in that situation is I'll say, but if we sell over a certain amount, then we'll raise it and we'll pay you that much more, because that way everybody wins. Or we'll give more complimentary pieces or something like that. But as far as a rule of thumb, the going rate right now, I think it's pretty darn low. In fact, it's what it was paying when I broke into this business 15 years ago, and to me it's bizarre, because I don't really care what the rate is as far as other companies go. I mean, I'll have a talk with the sculptor and just see what we're going to work out. Now, what you need to kind of do is know how long it's going to take you to do the piece and figure out what you're comfortable with for an hour's work. That's what I did.
And honestly, when we were starting out, we'd sell them for a couple $100, you know. And I can remember Clay being at a show and saying, hell, I'll give you $300 for it, you know.
Yeah, don't sell it for that.
Yeah.
I'll give you more than that right here for it. He told us that.
But
I wasn't going to be stupid. 300 was pretty darn good. Good for both of us, let's say. But that was back then. When I first saw their work, I was so impressed. They'd done this Wolverine and Colossus. Remember, he stuck out his arm and Wolverine was jumping
Right.
forward. I was like, man, these guys, the movement was incredible. Just absolutely amazing.
Was that the one that was in the first Wayfair?
Was it?
What is it right there?
I hope.
I don't know that.
I want to say say, if China Dragon and Clay thinks it's a good idea, then we're in it, you know,
Well, that's a good idea.
whatever.
Well, when I read it on the forum, there was a lot of people that said they were in. I mean, it's like 11 pages long.
Well-
So I just thought, maybe it was in the works.
Was that maybe a guild though, or was it a
Are you
union?
talking about a guild or,
The hell? Do you know?
or a?
Well,
a union?
a guild is more of, we're artists, we're gonna trade information, right? A union is more of we're a block of power that we have to deal with. Is that right?
Because that way you can control the fact that if someone's trying to make you work over hours, or they're trying to say, you have set price, but then they want to change.
Yeah.
You'd like to be able to adjust your price without having them drop you or not paying you anything.
Exactly.
Or, you know what I mean?
Well, you definitely got to get some front money. I mean, you got to get 50% down. I mean,
Right.
that's a given.
50% down, what if they don't want to pay the rest? I mean, usually I'll do 50%. When it's halfway done, I'll take the 25%, and the last 25% done. But they-
Something like that'll work. To me, it's unheard of not to pay somebody for a piece that's been received that's going into production. I mean, but coming from a sculptor's point of view, I kind of understand that. I'm a smaller company, but I know that Jarrod and Brandon had a bad situation with a Japanese company that accepted a piece from them that they agreed upon and never paid you the rest of it, right?
That is true.
Yeah.
They said there's one more question that we have time for. We got to stop.
We got to stop there. I want to say thanks to everyone who came. I want to particularly thank these three guys, every one of whom is better than we are, better than we'll probably ever be, and that's the truth. I thank you all for coming.
Well, listen, anybody who wants to come by our booth and with any more questions, please feel free. I'll be at our booth for the rest of the show.
And Clay's booth. Thanks a lot, guys.
What booth number?
151 Friends